Several months ago, I
We're
think I was
recording now.
talking to you
We
about
started.
this. Okay,
Did you want to start?
I did.
Okay, go ahead.
Several months ago, I was walking our dog, maybe about 2 or 3 blocks from here. And as I'm walking our dog, I'm talking to a mutual friend of ours on my phone. And part of that conversation is just sort of being caught um, between what we were doing and what we would like to do. We're kind of in this liminal space. And this liminal space is, I mean, at least for me, it's this sense of uncertainty. And it seems like everything that you were is no longer. And what might be up ahead is really not discernible. So, truly a betwixt and between liminal space. And as I'm walking the dog, I see something trotting toward us. And as it gets closer, it's a coyote. And I thought, this is really interesting. A coyote just, I mean, it was just like trotting down the street like like a neighbor, or someone. But then it got more interesting, Dave. As the coyote got closer to us, it had a squirrel in its mouth. And I thought, wow, I've never seen that. And so I'm asking my friend, I said, you're not going to believe what just is happening. And so I said, there's this coyote. And I said, what's that about? And he said, well, coyotes and for some peoples and is kind of like the animal who is a trickster. And wouldn't it make sense that the trickster shows up during this time of liminality, of uncertainty? It's kind of like pulling the rug out from what maybe one knows or is experiencing. And so, okay, the coyote. And I said, well, what about the squirrel? And um, and he said, well, that's just like all of your routines, your habits, the things that maybe you depended on. It's all being kind of carried away. And so it was just so interesting that that happened. But even it got more interesting. So later that day, um, I drove to the lake to go to a wake. And so the wake was for a friend of mine. We were in a men's group together. And I wasn't quite sure where this place was. It was at the Milwaukee Yacht Club. So I parked into this parking lot that I knew and was familiar with and began walking. And sure enough, I could see where this yacht club was. And so as I'm walking to the yacht club, which is maybe about a mile away, um, I see this parking lot. And in this parking lot, there's one vehicle. And so as I get closer, I'm kind of looking at this vehicle, and I just happened to look at its license plate. Can you guess what the license plate said?
Say liminal.
Yeah, it was liminal. And so maybe I'm going to ask, so Dave,
Uh,
what does that mean?
yeah, yeah. What does liminal mean, or what does it mean that the car was in its own parking lot, its own liminal space?
Yeah, and what does it mean that this
Yeah,
aspect of liminality showed up twice in one
yeah.
day?
I mean, you and I have been trading back and forth. What are we going to talk about today? What's our theme going to be? And
Right.
um, in a way, I think we've thrown out a couple times. Maybe we'll talk about liminality, about a place in between two things, because it's hard to talk about what was. It's hard to talk about what will be. We're really in this liminal place as a country right now.
Yeah.
Um, and so to me, like when I think about liminality and maybe making that a theme for what we're going to talk about today, it's about becoming comfortable being in this place where you're kind of all alone, like that car in the parking lot. You're in this place. Your future isn't here yet. Your past isn't making sense. It's kind of like a midlife crisis or an initiation. Liminality's part of initiation, and there's often a trickster who's a guide who ushers you into liminality or guides you into liminality. So, and when you're in that space, you just sit, you wait, because if you try to do what you've always done, it's not going to work. And if you try to do something new, you won't know if it's going to work yet or not, because you're not in the new place, you're in the in between place.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate the point that as a country right now, we're very much in that sense of liminality. It's kind of the administration that we become familiar with will be leaving and a new administration. And so we're kind of really positioned right in that as a country. And then focusing down, one of the things that you and I have talked about is health.
Yeah.
We both have talked about our own health and being in this place of uncertainty, of liminality. I also think of all of the millions of people right now, maybe people that have positions in government or immigrants or so many different people are also experiencing this sense of liminality. And I think one of the things that comes up for me uh, can be fear, um, can be depression, can be worry. I mean, there's just so many different feelings. And so I wonder, I'm going to ask you as a medical professional, because you have seen this, you have experienced this. Um, how do we, I don't know, I don't want to say thrive. How do we survive? How do we navigate? Maybe that's for me a better word. How do we navigate these moments of liminality?
Yeah, I like that. Navigate, thrive. You can't really thrive when you're in a in between place.
Yeah.
Survive, you can try to survive, Navigate, though, navigate has a it's an active kind of image. You're navigating something. You might not be going anywhere. Maybe if you're a sailboat, you don't have any wind and it's becalmed, or maybe you're in a whirlpool or a rapids or something, where um, you're moving, but you're having to watch every single little moment when you're going through a rapids, like in a canoe or a kayak, and all of your attention's in this like little place of what's the next step. And if you're thinking two steps ahead, you can be lost because you just got to be in the moment when things are shifting like that so much. Um, one thing I might answer your question, but one thing that I was thinking about when you're talking about was so initiation. I've written so much about initiation. I'm always like, oh, this is such a cool thing. Initiation, transformation. We should be doing transformative work. We should be embracing our suffering, all this. And then, you're in it and you're like, this sucks, man.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
did I ever say all that dumb stuff about transformative learning? But, Jack Meserau's a sociologist who studied transformative learning, transformative education. And he has these 10 steps. And one of the steps is disorientation.
Hmm.
And then I kind of map this on some of my writing. I map this onto the initiation, like the classic initiation that Joseph Campbell talks about with the hero's or heroine's journey, has the idea that you're in your normal life and there's some separation that happens. You either separate because you're going towards change, or change comes to you and knocks you out of your usual orbit, your usual squirrel mind. Um, and then, so there's initiation or separation, then initiation, where the kind of transformative part happens, and then the return. And Meserau talks about disorientation. Then he has a stage where you realize that the disorientation is actually part of the learning process. Until you get to that point, you fight it and you're trying to go back. You keep trying to go back to the way it was, but you can't, because it's not the way it was anymore. Once you embrace the disorientation, then there can be some sort of like thread or path or something that opens up. Joseph Campbell talked about that doors will open for you where there was no door before. and then you pass through that initiation. Then, though, you have to return. You have to figure out, how do I bring the new knowledge or wisdom or understanding or new perspective of the world? How do I bring this back into the old place where everyone is thinking the old way? And that may be yourself. How do you, part of you might be embracing this transformation. Part of you might be saying, I want things to stay the same. I suppose that's one of the most curious things about human beings, Chris. I'll ask you as a therapist about this, but why do people resist change? Why do people always say, I want it to be the way it was?
Good question. I wish I knew the answer. Well, certainly how things are or how they were is comforting. It gives a sense of certainty. And yet, at least I can say for me, staying there, I've noticed in my own experience, I can experience a sense of being stagnant. Um, that I feel like I lose some of my purpose. And whereas sort of embracing something new, it certainly is for me challenging. I certainly feel more alive. It's not necessarily difficult or easy, maybe I should say. Um, but I think just for ongoing growth, um, understanding, um, I found kind of change to be helpful. And the other part of what you're saying, and you've said this, and we both read this, is, when we kind of go through that cycle that you talked about, it feels like one of the outcomes is how can I share this with a community? And what are ways that I might share this with the community? It's sort of like I mean, this is one example. Um, and that is like when you go through, I was on the phone this week um, with a friend and going through sort of the chronic illness that I have. And believe it or not, there are moments when I'm able to share some of what I have learned from going through that potentially can be helpful. I wouldn't have known this knowledge any other way, uh, only by going through it and experiencing the fullness of it.
Yeah, when I was diagnosed with cancer and I spoke with my friend Joseph Rael, he said, well, why do you think you got cancer? And I started to hem and haw and think about these different things, like something that I did wrong or something, that happened to me. And then he said, it's because you're still in training. And then I thought, I don't know what I'm training for, but that is a little bit comforting to think, when something bad happens, something you don't like, to think, okay, this is part of my training. How do I use this for my ongoing personal growth? And as you were talking earlier, I was thinking, before this election, I felt like you and I had some stuff we could offer people, self-care, well-being, meditation, yoga, all these different things that we've done, that now we're sharing with people. And I've had kind of this crisis where I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do for myself. I don't know what to do to advise other people. It's completely disorienting. And um, and then there's that inauthenticity that comes out when somebody gives you like oh, it's all for the best, or oh, you're in training, you're going to learn from this. There's these different things that people could say where you feel like, well, you don't understand the magnitude of this disorientation right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's well said. It's something in the third book I've been writing about, and it struck me and that when I was reflecting on my mom's death by suicide, that in kind of thinking about that, writing about it, it began to dawn on me that there are a number of people, kind of like the disinherited, persons that maybe are forgotten. And it kind of just opened my eyes up that for many of these people, they do all of the right things. They do their self-care. They and yet with all of those efforts, there's still this sense of being forgotten, alone, disinherited. And I guess in writing about that, I guess it sort of dawned on me, and I can't tell you if this is true or not, that I don't know if we really, I ask myself, I don't know if I really do enough connecting or trying to understand this group of people that I know are out there that have that experience. And so it's just it's something that I think about. I think about what are ways whom am I not hearing or listening to? Who are those people that may be neighbors that may be struggling with loneliness or depression, um, and that may not be finding a sense of solace or not finding a sense of purpose. So it's just something that I just found myself very interested in and kind of asking myself the question is, who are these people? Who are these groups? And what are ways that I might be able to reach out and maybe offer um, something that could be, um, I don't want to say helpful, but at least just recognizing, acknowledging them, listening to their voice.
Yeah. When you've gone through something and you're, even if you're not all the way on the other side, you've gone around the loop a few times, it is possible to help other people who are just getting on that loop for the first time. And I think about when you were searching earlier for, the language of, is it to thrive, to survive, or to navigate? In what way are you helping somebody? And, in situations like losing somebody to suicide, you don't say, I'm going to come and help you thrive,
Mhm.
in going through this. And even to survive, I mean, there might be times where somebody's just trying to survive, but I think the navigate again holds here as an authentic pathway or means of working with somebody else and working with yourself too, because if you've navigated something yourself, you have some idea of some of the common pitfalls and whirlpools and places that you can get stuck.
I sent you this little piece, I think, earlier this week, but I thought it was such a great um, response, I think, to some of what we're talking about now. But it was written by Kyra Jewel Lingo, who is a Buddhist practitioner in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese meditation teacher. And Thich Nhat Hanh and a number of monks and the person who wrote this article, Kyra Jewel, were in California and some event. And in the middle of this, before they got to this event, is when 9/11 happened. And so immediately the monks and the people that were with Thich Nhat Hanh, the teacher, we need to do something. And so Thich Nhat Hanh said, I know what we're going to do. And they, were like, okay, what are we going to write something? We're going to post something. And he said, we're going to go to the beach. And, they were just like, what? And so they did go to the beach. And they spent the day, listening to the ocean, walking, eating. And then the following day, they resumed some of what they were going to do and then also responding to 9/11. But I like that kind of approach that when we enter into these moments of not knowing, and that's, a pretty high level of not knowing 9/11 for for our country and for each of us. That the first response was, let's just kind of mm, care for ourselves. And kind of the wisdom in that is that in doing that, then the next day, maybe we can approach what lies before us in a different way, maybe in a way that is less reactive and more from this place that represents maybe our values or our experience, and that's sort of what they did. And I felt that that was very skillful. It's sort of like what you and I have talked about is at least there's a period that just taking naps, right?
Yeah. Health
That
issues. Yeah. Right.
sure there's
Mm.
work to do, there's
Yep.
things to do,
Hmm.
there's papers to write, there's emails to respond to, but maybe the
Hmm.
best thing, and maybe the best thing for me
Hmm.
in doing all these other things is just take a nap.
Yeah. Nap medicine, I
Nap
started to
medicine.
call it. Yeah. Yeah. As you go, you slip into the unconscious and you um, have a chance to, come up with a new, refreshed perspective. There were times where the moment I would lie down to take a nap is when I would feel my highest level of well-being of the day. I'd be like, I'm at a 10 out of 10. I don't have to do anything. The only thing I have to do is get a little bit more comfortable in the bed, um, and not worry about anything. Um, one thing I think when you get your feet knocked out from under you, you get your wind knocked out, um, and I feel a little bit like that. You remember when you're a kid and you fall to the ground and the wind gets knocked out, and you're in that liminal space, like you can't literally you can't breathe in, you can't move forward, you're just like on your back. Um, and those times, turning to spiritual practices or spiritual traditions, like I was thinking a lot about Taoism recently and how, from a Taoist perspective, there's the individual, there's you can you could have the family, society, the planet, you could have, multiple different levels, but even let's just say the individual, the society, and the planet, each of those can either be in harmony with the Tao or it can be in disharmony with the Tao. And that going to the beach could be like everything's out of whack right now, but at least I'm going to get right for myself. I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to get in harmony with, the rhythms of nature. And then I'm going to tackle the societal problems. Um, the Taoists, a lot of the Taoist sages would retreat during times when they said, right now the state is out of harmony with the Tao. So why would I go and stick my neck out and tell the ruler of the state they need to change when they're out of harmony? That's just going to bring danger upon myself. Um, and then there's other times where they do act to try and change things. And I suppose I've been wondering about that myself. Is this a time that everyone needs to retreat like a turtle into their own individual shell, or everyone goes to their own beach for a while and then comes back and then we see what's going to happen? Or, do we need to get more engaged and, um, resist against things that we don't agree with?
I want to pick up something that you talked about with spiritual practice. Um, I was writing this week about the spiritual practice of chanting. And so for 1 month, I practiced chanting. And one of the things that I learned about chanting was that often you use a word or a phrase. And to me, that's like an aspect of form. So spiritual practice has a form and structure. And in chanting, it's repeating a word over and over. But in that chanting, there is something else. There's often always a space. So you say the word or phrase, and there's at least a little space. It's kind of like a rest note. It's a liminal space that is really embedded in the spiritual practice of chanting. And so as I began to chant, I began noticing, again, I maybe borrow from architecture. There's a form and structure. I'm thinking of Notre Dame, which is opening today, I think.
Mhm.
And one of the cool things about some of the structure is you need the form and you need space. And both have a very intimate relationship with each other, form and space, and sort of like yin and yang. And they're not separated. They are, and yet they're not. And one of the things I noticed that chanting was very similar to this, that the phrase, the words itself was the form, but just that little breath, that little pause after was like the space. And as I continued to kind of practice this for a month, I noticed that the space was nothing and everything. And that the space at times allowed for undefended receiving and also a space where, different things had an opportunity to interplay with me. It's sort of like that um, a little bit about that coyote and squirrel. There's an element of that where that space kind of like that's where the rug gets pulled off. That's where, I've done my due diligence by repeating the phrase, the work, the hard work, and yet that space opens up to this other place that if anything can be communicated, that is the place where it often happened. And so it just gave me a little more insight into spiritual practices, but I think many of them have sort of a similar through line, a thread, if you will. And that space is so valuable. And yet you need the form, you need the words, you need that concreteness of the practice. And sometimes I've always not liked the concreteness, the practice. It's boring. It's repetitive. It's not glamorous, and yet it really is important. It sort of allows for the other part to be as well. It's like they both need each other so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had that experience like chanting in a group, particularly where I'm like, I can't chant as long as whoever's leading the chant. I need to breathe again. Okay, it's frustrating, that I can't, have as long of a lung capacity as other people. But to embrace that space, to embrace that thing that's an interruption. And sometimes, particularly in the beginning, with chanting, it's like sometimes it goes really long and then it's choppy and it's short and it's but eventually, I think you do get into like a more of a steady rhythm at some point. And it reminds me of two practices. One is with a breath practice of resting in the breath, in the space between the in breath and the out breath, and starting to focus on that space. I don't know if it's true, but I heard something about long distance runners. Maybe you even said this of that rest period, when you're in between one leg moving forward and the other leg moving back, where you're in air, there's a moment where you can completely relax and rest your body where you're not driving and you're finding that space within the movement. And one other practice that I came across that was really interesting. Have you ever heard of this one where you imagine the space between your joints? And it's like a body scan, but instead of focusing on like your hand, you're focusing on your joints and you're imagining the space between each joint, just like micro relaxing. It's a very, for me, I found it as a very relaxing and kind of comforting practice because it feels like it creates more space and support within myself.
Dave, a number of years ago, my wife, who is an artist, we had this idea, wouldn't it be interesting if we could combine both of our passions and create maybe a course? And so we did. We called it mindful drawing. Um, and it was really a fun class to teach together. But one of the things that I remember with what you just said is that when my wife was teaching about drawing, she invited us to look at negative space. So it's like whatever the object is, the space around it, or it's sort of like the bowl, the space in the bowl. And to me, that was such a different way of seeing that was really delightful. And I noticed that as I was practicing drawing, that it really helped facilitate my ability and skill at drawing something by really in addition to seeing the object itself, but also kind of shifting that perspective and looking at the negative space around the object. Anyway, it there's a little bit of liminality there, with
Mhm.
that negative space. Um, and it also reminds me sort of like the space, the rest note that, I was talking about in terms of the
Mhm.
chanting.
Yeah, maybe that's where we are right now. Like right now, I'm about to sneeze. Am I going to sneeze? Am I not going to sneeze? Will it abate or will it come to the surface? I don't know. Right now, it's a little uncomfortable. I think I won't sneeze.
Well, what do you think? I'm thinking about the poem that you had
Hmm.
talked
Yeah,
about.
yeah, we can do that. I kept thinking this is a great poem for our podcast by William Stafford. It's called The Way It Is. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread.
I feel like that could be like the next podcast. What's the thread?
What's the thread? Yeah, it could be. I like that he doesn't define it.
Yeah.
It's just the thread. You try to explain it to others and they don't understand, probably because you don't understand yourself exactly. But it's the thing that you have to do. I was thinking about this too, like what do we do? What is the right thing to do right now? And if you're in the rapid, you do whatever needs to be done in the moment. And that might be going to the beach, might be going to the grocery store, might be taking a nap. Um, it might be cleaning the house and getting ready for a party. Um, but you don't need to know the second next thing and the third next thing and the fourth next thing at this point. I think that's when you get into the liminal zone. It takes you out of that squirrel mind of like, I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this. And illness does that too. You and I both been in these places where, for me, there's times where I feel like I'm not healthy and I'm not like dying, but I'm somewhere in between. And it's hard to say, well, what is that in between space? Someone says, how are you doing today? I'm like, well, I had total body neuropathy and myalgias, but I'm doing okay considering that. Um, so, but with the health, you like I've started to on the weekends, like what's the one thing I want to do on the weekend? And I start with that. And if I've got energy, then I do something else. I see what else comes up. Or maybe I take a nap and then see what's the one thing I want to do when I wake up from the nap.
I have thought about this thread and have to confess that there are times I don't know what that thread is. I don't know, I really I wouldn't recognize it. Um, and so to me, that is my experience of that liminality that And maybe in time it reveals itself. I mean, maybe there's an aspect where one trusts whatever that thread might be. Um, or as kind of what you said earlier, maybe I need to be patient to know what that thread is. Um, but I guess there's part of me that want to acknowledge that, at least for me, there are times I'm not sure what that thread is.
It reminds me of a quote. Do you know where this is from? Of like, what is the one thing that you cannot not do?
Yeah.
So
Well, that's
when you're in that liminal space, it's like you're thrown back upon yourself, and you don't even know what you will do in that situation. Okay, so here's one. This it seems like a rather mundane one, but I wrote about it in Rehumanizing Medicine, my first book, as far as intuitive problem solving. Like, how do you use intuition to solve a problem? And your logical mind will say, well, I should do this, I should do that. And you can also look at your emotional self and say, well, my logical mind says I should do that, but how do I feel about it? Do I feel like I want to do that? But with intuition, I was in this situation where I was at a multi-specialty group practice. I'd been there for about 3 years. I'd been out of practice maybe about 5 years at that point, so relatively new career, early career psychiatrist. The doctors owned the clinic. They sold it to a medical management company who came in and said, "We're going to institute uh, an eat what you kill model." And I thought, we're actually not supposed to kill anyone. Maybe we should come up with a better metaphor for like how our business model for this clinic is going to run. So anyway, we had 4 psychiatrists. 3 of them said they were leaving. I didn't know what to do. I was a little bit like a deer in the headlight. All the team is coming to me. The other social workers and psychologists are like, "Are you going to stay? Are you going to go? What's going on?" Because it could affect the whole clinic if all the psychiatrists left. The new administration came to me and said, "We'd like to make you the medical director, and you can do whatever you want. You can cut out the dead wood. We'll pick some good contract, and you can be the boss." And I said, "Oh, could we create a holistic health clinic?" And I said, "There's a lot of money in that. People pay out of pocket for that." And they said, "Yeah, sure. Makes money. We're good with it." And then, for a moment, it was kind of like the ring, like I see the power of the ring. I'm like, I can be the boss. I can use this power for good. And then I thought, dead wood, there's no dead wood in our team. I mean, everybody, these are my friends, I can't go in and do that. And so then I didn't, oh, I had a non-compete clause. So if I left, I had 2 years, I had to drive 30 miles outside of Champaign-Urbana. You've ever driven 30 miles outside of Champaign-Urbana, there's a whole lot
I
of
have.
corn and soybean, right? That's how I ended up working in Paris, Illinois. Remember when I
Uh,
joked with you off Mike earlier? Um, so so anyway, Mary Pat and I went to this pie place, and it was late, like 9 o'clock or something, 9:30. I'm like, hell with it. I'm just gonna have a cup of coffee, and I'm gonna have a piece of blueberry pie, and I'm gonna enjoy myself. And in between one bite and another blueberry pie, I said, "I'm leaving." I should say, "I'm leaving the clinic." You know, um, it just became clear, and I knew it in my bones. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was so caught up in what would I do if I left that I wasn't looking at, can I actually live with myself if I stay? So it's a little bit of that paradigm shift of not looking at the step after the step after the step, just looking at where you are in the moment. And in the moment, I was like, I can't do business with these people. I can't live with myself. I can't make this work. So I'm going to leave, and I'll figure out how to make it work. And within like a few weeks, I had 3 different job offers. So, but I ended up driving quite a bit, for a few years.
you've helped me to remember something. You've helped me to remember a thread. Um, so during all of this um, active illness, which is now entering in its eighth or ninth month, one of the threads for me has been writing and editing. And one of the things that happened for me is, in addition to the illness, it's had an impact on work where I am not working near as much as I have in the past. And so, because of that, I've been cutting out a lot of the extras. It's like getting back to our navigation. I'm throwing stuff off of the ship to keep it afloat. And at a certain point, I wrote an email to the editor that I've been working with, and I said, it's great working with you, but I don't think I can continue, at least for a while, just because the boat needs to stay afloat and keep moving. And so that was like, felt like I needed to do that, kind of like the logical mind. And then several weeks went by. And I'm getting close to finishing with some of the editing and eventually publishing the second book, Hope Opens Doors. And so I was losing hope in more than one way here. And when you said that bite between, your slice of blueberry pie, I was downstairs having oatmeal one morning, and I thought, I can't do that. This is my lifeline. This is my thread. This is what has nourished me. This is what, um, in some ways, has really helped me to kind of move through this experience the past 8 or 9 months. So I wrote her an email. And again, this is sort of like a leap of faith. Um, and I just said, could we resume? I had sent her a section of the book, and I said, would you mind? And it was kind of like the last section. I said, could we resume and just finish off this section? And I kind of felt like something had connected. I had reconnected a sense of wholeness. I mean, it didn't make logical sense, but it made sense here for me. And so there has been a thread. And that certainly has been one of them.
I think, with like burnout or illness, kind of narrows things down to where you feel like you can even get to a point where you feel like nothing's important anymore. And then but in that place, you can say, but what is the one thing I can't let go of? What is the one thing I really want to do? I had that experience too when we were going to move to New Zealand, where, we had our dog had died, our cat had died, like almost all of our friends, close circle of friends had moved away from where we were living. Even in the second circle of friends, the people you see like once a month or something, some of them were talking about moving. And we were like, what in the world are we doing here? And I said, well, we could go to New Zealand. I got some books on New Zealand. I started reading about all this stuff. I looked at jobs. And then I said, you know what? We can't do that right now. What are we thinking? And I got really depressed for like a week or two. And then I was like, well, why am I so depressed? And I was like, I was so enthusiastic thinking about moving to New Zealand. And now thinking, well, let's revisit in a couple of years. I've got my private practice going. It doesn't make sense. I'm getting connected to the medical school, and I had this like group of people. We're doing this different teaching, and I was like, but I'm depressed. I don't feel any joy when I think about staying. When I think about leaving, you know, I get really excited about this idea of an adventure. And so you can use yourself almost like a template or something that you're stepping onto and off of. You can say, how do I feel in my whole being when I think about if I do this? And how do I feel in my whole being when I think about doing this other thing? And then weighing back and forth these choices like you're on a scale and you're weighing, you're thinking, which side has more passion? Which side has more joy? And just like there's that quote of, um, what is the one thing that you cannot not do? Um, there's a quote by Philip K. Dick that I've read and I can't find it. look through all of his books again. So if anyone out there knows this Philip K. Dick quote, where it is, what book it's in, let me know. But there's something where he's writing and he says um, something like, the way you become other than who you are is by doing that which you never would do.
Yeah.
So I think there's two things. Sometimes there's things that we hold that we know and they're the thread and we let go of it for some reason. There's other times until you open your hand, you don't know what the thread is that's in that hand. And if you can open it up to let go, then you're like, oh my God, I like this. I didn't know it. Or this is what's important to me right now. So that idea of not knowing what the thread is and holding on to it, I don't know, maybe you have to let go of it sometimes too to know that that's actually the important thread.
And I'm thinking that that may be one thing that can happen during liminality,
Mm-hmm.
is that at least my experience is there is a surrendering at some point, a surrendering, or at least there's an option to surrender. Certainly there's an aspect of holding on, but but at a certain point, at least for me, holding on was just too painful. Um, that it just invited the sense of surrendering, of letting go, and opening oneself to what might come next.
What is going to come next, Chris? Do you have a practice for us, or how are we going to end the
Yeah, I was
thing
thinking of
today?
that too. I had this mind, and this is not a practice, but I was thinking those who are listening to this, would it make sense and help me along with this practice that is I'm making it up right on the spot here, is what are those things that are your threads? What are those
Mm-hmm.
things?
Yeah.
Um, when you think of navigating these present waters of liminality, of not knowing, what are the things that you wouldn't throw off of your boat? What are things that you would keep?
Or what's
Uh,
the thing that you throw off and then you realize I'm diving in after
yeah, right.
it? That
That
one.
was my yeah, that
Right.
too.
Uh, yeah.
Uh, but
Mhm.
I think, as I think about these waters that all of us are navigating in the next few months, that might be an interesting um, practice and exploration of yeah, what are those things that you threw out that you want to retrieve? What are those things that you wouldn't? And then the next step is maybe to get curious. What is it about those things that you would keep on your ship? What is it about those that are nourishing in this particular moment? Um, how are they speaking to you? How do they speak to others?
Yeah, so practice could be a writing practice that people
Yeah.
do on their own, where they ask themselves, what's my thread, or what are some of my threads, and then the way to approach it is, I'll often think about, we're the most purely who we are sometimes as children and teenagers.
Mm.
And so if you don't know what to do, think back to, what did you love to do back then? Or what did you dream of doing back then? And so then you can sort of, in that sense, you're recapturing something that's there, but that you let go of. And then the other thing is, what have you always dreamed about doing? What have you never done before, but you've always thought at some point in my life, blah, blah, blah. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is that some point in your life where you're going to take the art class, or go on a backpacking trip, or write your book, or whatever it may be.
And I'm also thinking, Dave, if listeners would care, we would love to hear um, some of what, again, they would keep. What are those threads? And so the different platforms that this is on, um, again, we would just love to hear from different listeners, however they wish to communicate. What are some of those things? I think it's something to put that into writing, I think it's also there's something about just speaking it out loud and sharing that I think there can be some agency and empowerment in that.
Yeah, a good practice.
I guess we're giving out homework this time.
But yeah, I was trying to avoid saying homework. Part of me wanted to say it, part of me didn't want to say it.
Yeah,
I was like, yeah, the practice this time is homework. We're not going to hold your hand through it or walk you through it.
yeah, it's a practice of liminality,
Yep.
being with it.
Oh, here it is. Imagine yourself driving into a parking lot where there's no other cars.
How about this? How about this? You're in a parking lot with cars and you open the door. And when you open the door, you see
Coyote with a squirrel in its mouth.
all
One
right.
of the few times I saw a fox was at Turkey Run State Park in Indiana. And Mary Pat and I were walking down this trail, and all of a sudden this fox was in the trail, and it like jumped up and then landed in this brush, and there was this like horrendous squeal, and then it was gone. And we came over, and all that was left was a little bit of squirrel fur.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Is that a really good way to end a podcast?
I think so.
Me too.
I'll
Thanks,
see you
Dave.
next time, Chris.
All
Yeah.
right. Take care.
All right, let's stop recording.